The auctioneer's hammer fell with barely a sound. 25 cents. That's all it took to buy a forgotten stagecoach that had sat rotting in a barn for decades. Elijah Carrigan stood alone in the dusty courtyard, holding a rusted key that might not even work anymore. The coach looked cursed, windows shattered, the wooden frame riddled with bullet holes, iron hardware twisted from years of neglect. Paint had peeled away in long strips, revealing grey wood beneath that looked more like bone than timber. Most folks had whispered warnings about the thing, said it brought nothing but trouble to anyone who got too close, that it had carried passengers on a doomed final ride, that blood still stained the floorboards if you knew where to look. But Elijah saw something else. He ran his fingers along the splintered doorframe and felt deep gouges carved into the surface, not random damage from weather or time. These marks formed deliberate patterns, symbols that seemed to follow a specific sequence. "You're mad, you know that." Maggie Rowe adjusted her spectacles and peered at the decrepit coach with barely concealed skepticism. She'd come straight from the library, still wearing her work apron, dust from old ledgers clinging to her sleeves. Maybe. Elijah circled the coach slowly, studying every inch, but nobody else even bid on it, because nobody else wants a death trap on wheels. Maggie kicked at one of the iron-rimmed wheels. It didn't budge. What happened to collecting nice things? Pottery? Vintage maps? Normal relics? This is normal. Elijah crouched beside the rear axle, examining the undercarriage. The Midland Express. I've seen references to it in territorial records. Disappeared during a run 40 years ago. Just vanished off the route between Coulter's Ridge and New Haven. Maggie's expression shifted from skepticism to interest. She'd always had a weakness for unsolved mysteries, even when she pretended otherwise. Disappeared how? That's the question. Elijah stood, brushing dirt from his knees. Records say it never reached its destination. No bodies found, no wreckage. Then it turns up in some rancher's barn 20 miles off route, and nobody can explain how it got there. 25 cents seems generous for a ghost story on wheels. Help me get it to my workshop and I'll split whatever historical value we uncover. Maggie laughed. Historical value? Elijah, it's kindling. But she was already walking around to inspect the other side. Elijah knew that look. She was hooked. Old Mrs. Calloway shuffled past, clutching her shawl despite the warm afternoon. She paused, squinting at the coach through rheumy eyes. That's the one, isn't it? The one that came back wrong. Ma'am? Elijah approached gently. Mrs. Calloway had lived in the territory longer than anyone could remember. I was just a girl. Saw it roll through town that last time. Driver looked straight ahead. Wouldn't meet nobody's eyes. Horses were lathered like they'd run through hell itself. She shook her head slowly. 3 days later, they found it empty. Doors wide open, like whatever was inside just walked away. Do you remember anything else? About what it was carrying? Mrs. Calloway's gaze grew distant. Payroll, they said. But folks whispered it was something worse. Something the outlaws wouldn't touch. She gripped Elijah's arm with surprising strength. You be careful with that thing. Some secrets are buried for good reason. She shuffled away, leaving Elijah and Maggie in uncomfortable silence. Well, Maggie cleared her throat. That's not ominous at all. Elijah returned to the coach, but his mind was racing. Payroll runs got robbed all the time. What kind of cargo would make outlaws flee? That night, with the coach safely loaded onto a borrowed wagon and transported to his workshop behind the old schoolhouse, Elijah lit every lamp he owned and began his inspection. The bullet holes told a story. They clustered around the driver's bench and door frames. Defensive positions. Someone had fired from inside the coach, not at it. He found spent casings wedged between floorboards, brass tarnished green with age. But it was the floor itself that caught his attention. Elijah knelt, running his hands across the warped planks. They didn't sit flush. The boards near the rear bench rose slightly higher than they should, creating an almost imperceptible lip. He pressed down hard. Nothing. He tried lifting. Still nothing. Then he noticed it, carved into the underside of the rear bench. Hidden unless you stuck your head completely underneath, was a symbol, a circle, with 3 lines extending from it. The same symbol he'd seen on the door frame. Elijah's pulse quickened. This wasn't random damage. Someone had marked this coach deliberately, leaving a trail of clues that had survived 4 decades of neglect. He needed better tools, and he needed Maggie's research skills. Tomorrow they'd start unraveling this mystery properly. But tonight, staring at that hidden symbol in the lamplight, Elijah felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not since before the fever took his wife, before teaching became a way to fill empty hours rather than shape young minds. He felt alive. Jonas Pike arrived at dawn with his toolkit, a man built like the iron he shaped for a living. His hands were scarred from decades at the forge, fingers thick as railroad spikes. "You want me to do what now?" Jonas set down his heavy bag with a thud that rattled Elijah's workbench. "Just help me remove these floorboards without destroying them." Elijah gestured at the coach's interior. "There's something underneath, I'm sure of it." "You're sure, or you're hoping?" "Both." Jonas grunted. "That's honest, at least." He pulled out a pry bar and wedge. "Show me where." They worked carefully, Jonas providing the muscle while Elijah guided the process. The wood resisted, swollen with moisture and age, but Jonas knew his way around stubborn materials. He positioned the wedge at precise angles, applying pressure gradually to avoid splintering the ancient planks. "There." Jonas pointed with the pry bar. "See how this one's been cut and refitted, different nails than the others. Newer, relatively speaking." Elijah hadn't noticed, but Jonas was right. Someone had removed and replaced this section of flooring after the coach's original construction. Somebody was hiding something, Jonas said. They removed 3 boards, revealing a shallow cavity between the floor and the coach's undercarriage. Inside lay a false compartment, its edges sealed with tar and fitted with iron rivets that had rusted into the wood. "That's custom work," Jonas whistled low. "Good custom work too. Whoever built this knew what they were doing." Elijah's hands shook as he reached into the compartment. His fingers touched leather. He pulled out a weathered journal, its cover marked with the same strange insignia he'd found carved throughout the coach. "Well," Jonas sat back on his heels. "That's something." The journal felt heavy, substantial. Water damage had warped some pages, but most remained intact. Elijah opened it carefully, revealing cramped handwriting in faded ink. The first entry was dated April 3, 1885. "The cargo is secured, 3 crates as promised. Though I question the wisdom of this entire enterprise. The tycoon's man assured me the route is safe, but I've seen how the Boone gang operates. They're watching the Midland Express." "They're always watching," Elijah read aloud while Jonas listened, his weathered face growing more troubled with each passage. "April 8th. We leave at dawn. I've hired additional guards, though against what I'm protecting this cargo, I'm not certain guns will matter. The sealed orders state only that these crates must reach New Haven untouched, unopened. The tycoon himself threatened consequences if we fail. What manner of payroll requires such secrecy?" "Payroll." Jonas repeated the word like a curse. "Mrs. Calloway mentioned payroll yesterday, but this doesn't sound like money." Elijah flipped through more pages, finding sketches interspersed with text, maps, symbols, the layout of the coach itself, with certain areas marked. "This sounds like something worse." April 12th. The ambush came at Widow's Creek, the Boone gang, as predicted. But when they breached the coach and saw the insignia on the crates, they fled. I've never seen outlaws run from plunder before. Whatever the tycoon has entrusted to us, it carries a reputation that precedes it. The guards are nervous. One suggested we abandon the cargo and save ourselves. I refused. We're too deep into this now. The entries grew more frantic after that. The handwriting shakier. We're being followed. Not by outlaws this time. These riders wear no identifying marks, but they move with military precision. I believe the tycoon has sent his own men to ensure we don't stray from our purpose, or perhaps to ensure we never reach New Haven at all. I no longer know who to trust. The final entry was barely legible. They're coming. I've hidden the journal where only someone who understands will find it. The crates remain sealed beneath the false panels. If you're reading this, you've followed the markings. Be warned. The cargo within is not gold or silver. It's evidence. Evidence of crimes committed in the name of progress. Evidence powerful men would kill to suppress. May God forgive me for what I've helped transport. The entry ended there, unsigned. Elijah closed the journal slowly. Jonas had gone pale beneath his sunburn. Evidence, Jonas said quietly. He was transporting evidence against this tycoon. Evidence hidden so well that even outlaws feared it. Elijah stood, his legs unsteady. Jonas, there are more compartments in this coach. I'm certain of it. The journal mentions false panels, plural. Then we need to find them. Jonas picked up his tools again, but his enthusiasm had dimmed, though I'm starting to think Mrs. Calloway was right. Some secrets are buried for good reason. Too late for that now. Elijah examined the interior walls, looking for more inconsistencies. We've already opened the box. They worked through the afternoon, removing panels and tapping walls, listening for hollow spaces. The coach revealed itself slowly, a puzzle box designed by someone who understood that true hiding places don't look hidden at all. Behind the driver's bench, they found another compartment containing 3 sealed envelopes, their wax seals still intact, despite the decades. Beneath the rear bench, a narrow space held a small metal box, locked with a mechanism neither of them could immediately decipher, and carved into every hidden space. Those same symbols, circles, lines, stars arranged in patterns that seemed to mean something, if only they could read the language. By the time shadows lengthened across the workshop, they'd catalogued 7 separate hiding places, but the crates mentioned in the journal remained elusive. Maybe they were removed, Jonas suggested. Whoever abandoned this coach might have taken the crates with them. No, Elijah tapped the journal. He said he hid them beneath false panels. We haven't found false panels, just compartment. What's the difference? A compartment is a space. A false panel is a wall that isn't really a wall. Jonas's eyes widened. You mean the exterior panels? They moved outside, examining the coach's outer shell. The wood was badly damaged, but Jonas's trained eye quickly found what they were looking for. Here, he pointed to a section of the rear panel. These boards are thicker than they should be. And look, the nails are driven in at different depths. Someone built a second wall inside the original. It took another hour of careful work, but eventually they pried away the outer boards to reveal the hollow space within. 3 crates, just as the journal described, each one wrapped in oiled canvas and marked with that same recurring insignia. A circle with 3 lines, but now Elijah recognized it for what it was. Not just a symbol, a warning. The library smelled of old paper and lamp oil. Maggie had spread territorial maps across her desk, anchoring the corners with leather-bound ledgers that predated statehood. The Midland Express ran from Coulter's Ridge to New Haven twice weekly, she said, tracing the route with her finger. Standard commercial and payroll service. Nothing remarkable about it until April of 1885. Elijah sat across from her, the journal open between them. He'd spent half the night trying to decipher the coded notes scattered throughout its pages. April 1885. Maggie consulted another ledger. That's when the territorial governor was investigating land fraud schemes. Several prominent businessmen were implicated, including railroad tycoons, especially railroad tycoons. Maggie pulled out a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle. Look at this. Midland Express vanishes en route. Authorities baffled. The article mentions that the coach was carrying payroll for mining operations, but it also notes that several important documents were believed to be aboard. What kind of documents? Doesn't say. But 3 days after the coach disappeared, the governor's investigation collapsed. Key witnesses recanted their testimony. Evidence went missing. The whole thing just died. Elijah leaned back, his mind racing. What if the coach wasn't robbed? What if it was sabotaged? Someone needed those documents to disappear. But the coach reappeared, empty. Empty of people, not empty of cargo. Elijah opened the journal to a page filled with sketches. Look at this drawing. It shows the layout of the coach, with specific areas marked. And these symbols, they match the carvings, Jonas. And I found throughout the actual coach. Maggie adjusted her spectacles, studying the sketches closely. It's a map. Someone created a map to the hiding places. Exactly. But why hide evidence you're trying to suppress? Why not just destroy it? Insurance. Maggie looked up, her expression grave. Someone wanted leverage, a way to protect themselves if their employer turned on them. The pieces were falling into place. The journal's author, whoever he was, had been caught between powerful forces. He'd agreed to transport dangerous evidence, but he'd also created an insurance policy, hiding the cargo so thoroughly that only someone who understood his symbols could retrieve it. We need to know who wrote this. Elijah flipped to the front of the journal, searching for a name. Most entries were unsigned, but one early page contained a fragment. As chief driver of the Midland Express, I hereby attest. Chief driver. Maggie pulled out another ledger, this one containing employment records. The Midland Express was owned by the Territorial Transport Company. Let me check their personnel files. She worked quickly, her fingers flying through pages with practiced efficiency. Elijah watched her, grateful for her methodical mind. He was good at seeing patterns, but Maggie excelled at finding facts. Here, she stopped at a page marked with a coffee stain. Chief driver in 1885 was a man named Samuel Garrett. Hired in 1882, vanished in April 1885, same time as the coach. Samuel Garrett. Elijah repeated the name, committing it to memory. What else do we know about him? Not much. Standard employment records. Good driver, reliable, no disciplinary issues. Maggie paused, her finger resting on a notation at the bottom of the page. Wait, it says here that Garrett had previously worked for the Territorial Governor's office as a courier. A courier. Elijah felt his pulse quicken. Someone trusted to transport sensitive materials, someone who would know how to hide things. Maggie closed the ledger slowly. Elijah, I think Garrett was working both sides. He agreed to transport evidence for the tycoon, but he was also protecting it for the governor. And it got him killed. They sat in silence, the weight of that realization settling over them. Samuel Garrett had tried to play a dangerous game, and he'd lost. These crates Jonas and I found, Elijah said quietly. We haven't opened them yet. Part of me thinks we should turn them over to the authorities. What authorities? Maggie's question was pointed. If powerful men were willing to make a coach disappear 40 years ago, what makes you think their successors won't do the same to us? It was a fair point. The territorial government had changed, but power structures often survive transitions. Whoever had wanted that evidence buried might still have influence. Then what do we do? Maggie stood, walking to the window. Outside, the town went about its evening business, shopkeepers closing up, families heading home to supper. Normal life, unburdened by dangerous secrets. We open them, she said finally. We find out what's inside, then we decide what to do with the truth. Elijah joined her at the window. This isn't your fight, Maggie. I bought the coach. I found the journal. You can walk away. She turned to face him, her expression serious. You know I won't do that. I know. He managed a weak smile. But I had to offer. Besides, Maggie returned to the desk, gathering up the maps and ledgers. I'm a librarian. Information wants to be free. Whoever tried to bury this information failed to account for historians with too much curiosity and too little sense. That's us. That's us. That's us. They packed up the research materials carefully. Maggie would continue searching for more information about Samuel Garrett and the territorial investigation. Elijah would return to his workshop and finally open those crates. As they prepared to leave, Maggie paused. "There's one more thing. The journal mentions the Boone Gang specifically. They were active in this territory during the 1880s, known for robbing payroll coaches, but they disappeared shortly after the Midland Express incident." Disappeared how? Just stopped operating. Some folks said they disbanded. Others claimed they were hunted down. Maggie's expression was troubled, but nobody ever found bodies. They just vanished, like the coach itself. "You think they're connected? I think we're missing part of the story." Whatever frightened the Boone Gang away from those crates, it was powerful enough to make hardened outlaws abandon their trade entirely. Elijah thought about that as they stepped out into the cool evening air. The street was empty now, shops dark, only a few windows glowing with lamplight. He didn't notice the man watching from across the street. Didn't see the way the figure stepped back into shadows when Maggie locked the library door. But the man saw him, saw the journal under Elijah's arm, saw the way Maggie and Elijah spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Silas Boone had been waiting for this moment his entire life. His grandfather had told him stories about the Midland Express, about the day the Boone Gang fled in terror from a cargo they dared not touch. Those stories had haunted 3 generations of Boones, a legacy of cowardice that Silas meant to correct. Now, watching Elijah Carrigan walk away with secrets that belonged to his family's history, Silas made his decision. Whatever was in that coach, whatever his grandfather had feared, Silas would claim it. Not for money, for vindication, for proof that the Boone name meant something more than shame. He let Elijah get half a block ahead, then followed at a careful distance. Behind him, a second figure emerged from the shadows. This one wore a marshal's badge that caught the moonlight. Daniel Graves had been watching both of them, and unlike Silas Boone, he knew exactly what was in those crates. He'd helped load them onto the coach 40 years ago. Silas Boone appeared at Elijah's workshop 3 days later, arriving just after dawn when the morning light cast long shadows across the dusty yard. "Mr. Carrigan," his voice was smooth, cultured, nothing like what Elijah expected from an outlaw's descendant. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Elijah looked up from the workbench where he'd been examining one of the sealed envelopes. He'd been so focused he hadn't heard anyone approach. That realization sent a cold thread of unease down his spine. "Can I help you? Perhaps we can help each other." Silas stepped into the workshop without invitation, his eyes immediately finding the Stagecoach. Beautiful piece, even in its current condition. You can see the craftsmanship. It's being restored. Elijah closed the journal carefully, placing his hand over it. "Are you interested in frontier history?" "Family history, actually." Silas moved closer, circling the coach with an appraising eye. "My grandfather used to tell stories about the Midland Express. He was part of the Boone Gang back in the day. Perhaps you've heard of them." Elijah's mouth went dry. He forced his voice to remain steady. "The name sounds familiar. I'm sure it does." Silas ran his hand along the bullet-scarred doorframe, his fingers tracing the same gouges Elijah had noticed at the auction. "My grandfather was there the day this coach disappeared. He never forgot it, the day the Boone Gang ran from plunder like frightened children." "Why are you telling me this?" Silas turned, his smile pleasant, but his eyes cold. "Because that day haunted my family for 3 generations. My grandfather died without ever explaining what he saw inside this coach. My father spent his life chasing rumors, trying to restore the family name. And now here you are, a schoolteacher turned collector who bought our legacy for 25 cents. It's just a coach." "We both know that's not true." Silas gestured at the workbench, where tools and fragments of wood lay scattered. "You've been taking it apart, looking for something. I'm betting you've already found pieces of whatever made my grandfather flee." Elijah stood, positioning himself between Silas and the journal. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Silas's pleasant demeanor cracked slightly. Mr. Carrigan, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to make a proposal. Whatever secrets this coach holds, they belong to Boone blood. My grandfather earned them through fear and reputation. Share what you've found, and I'll make it worth your while. And if I refuse, then you're a fool who doesn't understand the game he's playing. Silas moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. My family spent decades trying to reclaim what's rightfully ours. I won't let a schoolteacher with delusions of historical importance stand in my way. That sounds like a threat. It's a warning. Silas tipped his hat. There are others interested in this coach, Mr. Carrigan. Others who won't be as polite as I've been. Think about my offer. I'll return in 2 days for your answer. He left without another word, his footsteps fading into the morning quiet. Elijah stood motionless, his heart hammering. He'd known this discovery was dangerous, but having that danger walk through his door and introduce itself was different, more real. He looked at the journal, then at the 3 crates still sealed behind their canvas wrapping. Jonas had wanted to pry them open immediately, but something had made Elijah hesitate. Now he understood why. Once those crates were opened, there would be no going back. But Silas Boone's visit had made one thing clear. They were already too deep to retreat. Elijah grabbed his coat and headed for the library. Maggie listened to his account of Silas's visit with growing alarm. They stood in the library's back room, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers and territorial records she'd been pulling all morning. He threatened you. He warned me, Elijah corrected. There's a difference, not much of one. Maggie paced, her skirt swishing against the floorboards. This is getting dangerous, Elijah. Maybe we should take everything to Marshal Graves. Maybe. Elijah wasn't sure he trusted the marshal, though he couldn't articulate why. But first, I need to know what's in those crates. Then let's open them. Here? Why not? If Boone is watching your workshop, he won't expect us to work here. Maggie pulled out a small prying tool she kept for opening sealed archive boxes. Besides, if these documents are what we think they are, the library is exactly where they should be examined. Elijah couldn't argue with that logic. Together, they returned to his workshop under the pretense of retrieving reference materials. Elijah loaded the smallest crate onto a handcart, covering it with canvas and old blankets. Nobody stopped them. Nobody seemed to notice. Back in the library's locked back room, they set the crate on a sturdy table. The oiled canvas wrapping had protected the wood beneath, keeping the container surprisingly intact despite 4 decades of storage. The journal mentioned sealed orders, Maggie said, warning that the crates must reach New Haven untouched, unopened. Whoever sent these didn't want anyone knowing what they contained. Elijah examined the iron bands holding the lid secure. The locks had rusted, but remained intact. Not even the driver, which means Samuel Garrett hid them without knowing their contents. Or he knew enough to be terrified. Maggie positioned the prying tool beneath the first lock. Only one way to find out. The rusted metal resisted, then snapped with a sharp crack. The second lock broke more easily. Together they lifted the heavy lid. Inside, wrapped in more oiled cloth, lay dozens of bundled documents. Maggie carefully removed the top bundle and unwrapped it. Payroll records. She spread the papers across the table. But look at the recipient names. These aren't mining companies. These are military rosters. Elijah picked up another bundle. Supply manifests. Weapons, ammunition, uniforms. All purchased through shell companies. He checked the dates. March 1885, right before the territorial governor's investigation. Keep going. The next layer held correspondence, letters written on expensive stationery, signed by names Elijah recognized from his historical research. Railroad executives, territorial officials, even a senator. Maggie read one aloud, her voice shaking. We must proceed with the suppression of labor agitation by any means necessary. The governor's sympathies toward organized workers threaten our entire enterprise. I have authorized payment for additional security forces. Ensure they understand their mandate includes lethal force if required. Security forces. Elijah pulled out another document. They weren't hiring guards. They were funding private militias. To break strikes. Maggie's face had gone pale. To intimidate workers. Maybe worse. The deeper they dug, the darker the picture became. The crate contained evidence of a coordinated conspiracy. Wealthy industrialists had pooled resources to crush labor movements across the territory. They'd bribed officials, funded armed groups, and systematically undermined any attempt at worker organization or protection. The territorial governor's investigation hadn't failed. It had been destroyed from within. This is why the Boone gang fled. Maggie held up a document bearing the same insignia they'd seen throughout the coach. This symbol, it wasn't just a marking, it was a signature. The tycoon's personal seal, and every outlaw in the territory would have recognized it. Elijah understood now. Taking this cargo wouldn't have been robbery. It would have been a declaration of war against the most powerful man in the territory. No wonder they ran. No wonder Samuel Garrett hid everything so carefully. Elijah gestured at the documents. This isn't just evidence of crimes. It's proof that the entire territorial power structure was corrupt. Maggie began carefully organizing the papers, sorting them by type and date. Her librarian's mind was already cataloging, creating order from chaos. "There are 2 more crates," she said quietly. "If this one contains payroll records and correspondence, what do the others hold?" Elijah thought about the weight of those remaining crates, the way they'd felt when he and Jonas had discovered them behind the false panel. The journal mentioned sealed orders. This felt like supporting documentation. "I think the real evidence is still waiting." A knock at the library's front door made them both jump. Maggie quickly covered the documents with canvas, while Elijah moved to check who'd arrived. Through the front window he saw Marshal Daniel Graves standing on the steps, his expression grim. "Don't open it," Maggie whispered. "Not yet." But Graves knocked again, harder this time. "Carrigan, I know you're in there. We need to talk." Elijah exchanged a glance with Maggie. They couldn't hide forever, and if Graves was here to help rather than hinder, they might need him. He opened the door. Marshal Graves stepped inside without ceremony, removing his hat. His weathered face carried lines of exhaustion that made him look older than his years. "You opened the crates." "It wasn't a question. How did you?" "Because I've been waiting 40 years for someone to find them." Graves moved past Elijah, into the main library. "Where's Miss Rowe? I imagine she's been helping you research." Maggie emerged from the back room, her chin raised defiantly. "Marshal, Miss Rowe." Graves nodded respectfully. "I'm not here to confiscate anything. I'm here to warn you both. Though I suspect I'm too late for that." "You knew about the stagecoach," Elijah said. "You knew what it was carrying." "I did more than know." Graves sank into a chair, suddenly looking ancient. "I helped load those crates onto the Midland Express. Spring of... I was a young deputy then, fresh out of training, eager to make a name for myself." He stared at his hands as if seeing them covered in something he couldn't wash away. "A man came to town, wealthy, connected, the kind of man who could make or break careers with a word. He needed secure transport for sensitive materials. Offered good money for deputies willing to ride escort. I volunteered." "What was his name?" Maggie asked. "Cornelius Thatch, railroad magnate, land speculator, one of the territory's founding fathers. They called him." Graves's voice dripped with bitterness. "I didn't know what we were transporting. Thatch said it was payroll records, financial documents that needed to reach his New Haven office securely. But it wasn't payroll." "No." Graves looked up, his eyes haunted. "Samuel Garrett figured it out. Saw the correspondence when one of the sealed packets broke open during loading. He came to me, said we were transporting evidence of murder. Said Thatch was using us to move proof of his crimes. What did you do? Nothing. The word came out broken. I was young and scared, and Thatch had promised me a promotion. I told Garrett to keep quiet and do his job. Silence filled the library. Outside, the town continued its morning routines, unaware of the history being unearthed. Within, the Boone gang's ambush wasn't random. Graves continued. Thatch arranged it. He needed the coach to disappear, needed the evidence lost. He paid the Boones to stage a robbery, but they didn't take the cargo. Elijah was beginning to understand, because when they saw Thatch's seal on those crates, they realized they'd been set up. Taking that cargo would have marked them for death. So they fled, and Thatch's plan fell apart. What happened to Garrett? Graves's jaw tightened. He disappeared with the coach. I always assumed Thatch's men killed him. But now, knowing he hid everything so carefully, I wonder if he escaped. If he's somewhere out there, waiting for the truth to surface. Why are you telling us this? Maggie's voice was gentle but firm. Why now? Because Silas Boone visited you this morning. Graves looked at Elijah. And because I know Boone isn't the only one watching. Thatch died 10 years ago, but his empire survived. His son, his business partners, they all have stakes in keeping these secrets buried. So what do we do? You have 3 choices. Graves stood, placing his hat back on his head. First, you can burn everything. Forget you ever found it. Live safe, quiet lives. We won't do that. I know. Second choice, you can turn it over to me. I'll take it to the territorial capital, try to get it into the right hands. But I've been a marshal long enough to know how these things work. Evidence gets lost. Witnesses recant. The powerful stay powerful. And the third choice. Graves walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. You do what Samuel Garrett couldn't. You make the truth so public, so undeniable, that it can't be buried again. But understand, that choice comes with consequences. For you, for Miss Rowe, for anyone who helps you. You're saying we'll be targets. I'm saying you already are. Graves opened the door, letting in the morning sunlight. Silas Boone is the least of your worries. When Thatch's people realize what you've found, they won't negotiate. They won't bargain. They'll eliminate the problem. Then why tell us to go public? Why not handle it yourself? Graves smiled sadly. Because I've been a coward for 40 years. I let Samuel Garrett face this alone, and it's haunted me ever since. I won't make that mistake again. Whatever you decide, Mr. Carrigan. Miss Rowe, I'm with you. He stepped outside, then turned back once more. Open the other crates. See everything Garrett died protecting. Then decide if you're brave enough to do what I wasn't. The door closed behind him, leaving Elijah and Maggie alone with their dangerous knowledge. We have to open them, Elijah said. I know. All of them. I know. Maggie returned to the back room and stood over the remaining documents, her hands trembling slightly. My mother used to say that history isn't just what happened, it's what we choose to remember. She looked at Elijah. These documents, this evidence, it's been forgotten for 40 years. If we do nothing, it stays forgotten. But if we expose it, we change history. We correct it. Elijah joined her, staring at the papers that represented lives destroyed, justice denied, truth suppressed. Samuel Garrett had given everything to preserve this evidence. Graves had spent 40 years living with his cowardice. Now the burden fell to a schoolteacher and a librarian. Let's get the other crates, Elijah said. Whatever's in them, we face it together. Maggie nodded, squaring her shoulders. Together. But neither of them noticed the shadow that had appeared at the library's side window. Silas Boone stood motionless in the alley, his face pressed against the glass, watching them handle documents he believed belonged to his family's legacy. He'd heard enough, seen enough. Tonight he would take what was rightfully his, by force, if necessary. Elijah woke to the smell of smoke. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, he thought he was dreaming. Then he heard the crackling sound, saw the orange glow flickering beneath his bedroom door, and reality crashed down with terrible clarity. Fire. He rolled from bed, grabbing his boots and coat. Smoke was already seeping under the door, thick and acrid. He pressed his hand against the wood, hot, but not yet burning. He had minutes, maybe less. The journal, the documents, everything they'd brought back from the library for safekeeping. Elijah threw open the door and was immediately driven back by a wall of heat. Flames consumed the front room of his small house, spreading with unnatural speed. This wasn't an accident. Someone had used accelerant. Through the smoke and flames, he could see his workbench. The journal sat where he'd left it, already curling in the heat. He couldn't reach it. The fire had cut off that entire section of the house. But the stagecoach stood in the workshop behind the house. A separate building, maybe still safe. Elijah crashed through the back door and into the cool night air. He gulped in clean breaths, his lungs burning. Behind him, his house groaned as flames ate through support beams. The workshop door stood open. Wrong. He'd locked it before bed. Elijah ran inside and stopped cold. The stagecoach had been destroyed, axed to pieces, seats torn apart, panels smashed. Someone had systematically demolished what he'd spent days carefully preserving. And on the wall, scrawled in paint still wet enough to drip, was a message. Stop digging. No. Elijah moved through the wreckage, checking the hidden compartments. Empty, the remaining 2 crates, gone. The sealed envelopes, gone. Everything except what he and Maggie had taken to the library. Footsteps behind him. Elijah spun, ready to fight or flee. Maggie stood in the doorway, her nightdress covered by a hastily thrown-on coat. Her face was pale in the firelight from the burning house. I saw the smoke from my window. She took in the destroyed coach, the threatening message. Oh, Elijah, they took everything. The crates, the envelopes, everything we hadn't moved yet. But not the documents at the library. Maggie's mind was already working. They don't know we moved the first crate. They will soon. Elijah kicked at a piece of the shattered coach. Whoever did this will search my house next. When they don't find what they're looking for, they'll come for us. Voices shouted in the distance. The fire had drawn attention. Soon the whole town would be awake, asking questions neither of them could safely answer. We need to go back to the library, Maggie said. Now, before they realize what we still have. They ran through empty streets, staying to shadows. Behind them, Elijah's house collapsed with a roar that echoed through the night. Everything he owned, every remnant of his life with his late wife, consumed by flames, meant to hide evidence of something darker. The library was dark and silent. Maggie unlocked the door with shaking hands. Inside, they lit a single lamp and moved to the back room, where they'd hidden the documents. Everything was still there, undisturbed. We're not safe here, Elijah said. Once they realize, I know. Maggie was already gathering the papers, organizing them into bundles, but we can't run with all of this. There's too much. Elijah examined the documents they'd pulled from the first crate, correspondence, payroll records, evidence of conspiracy, but incomplete. The journal had mentioned 3 crates. They'd only opened 1. The other crates are gone, he said. Whatever evidence they contained, whoever attacked us, has it now, or destroyed it. Maggie's voice was hollow. Like your house, like the coach. Then we work with what we have. Elijah began sorting papers into piles. We document everything, make copies if we can, and we get this information somewhere safe before they come for it. Where? Who can we trust? That was the question. Marshal Graves had offered help, but he'd also admitted to being part of the original conspiracy. Silas Boone wanted the secrets for his own purposes, and somewhere in the shadows, Thatcher's successors were moving to protect their inherited empire. A knock at the library's front door made them both freeze. 3 heavy strikes, then silence. Elijah moved to the window and peered out carefully. Marshal Graves stood on the steps alone, his face grim in the pre-dawn darkness. It's Graves, Elijah whispered. Don't open it. We don't know if we can trust him. We don't have a choice." Elijah moved to the door. If he wanted to hurt us, he wouldn't knock. He opened the door slowly. Graves stepped inside, his hand resting on his pistol, but not drawing it. "Your house is gone," Graves said without preamble. "Half the town saw it burn. They're saying it was an accident. Lamp oil knocked over. It wasn't an accident." "I know." Graves glanced toward the back room. "Did they get everything?" "The coach, the remaining crates, everything except what we'd already moved here." Graves nodded slowly. "Then they don't know about the library yet. That gives us time." "Time for what?" "To do what I told you before. Make this public." Graves pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I have contacts at the territorial newspaper, editors who owe me favors. We get this evidence to them. They'll print it, put it in front of every voter in the territory." "And then what?" Maggie had emerged from the back room. "The people responsible will know we're the source. They'll come for us anyway." "Maybe." Graves refolded the air. "But once it's public, killing you only confirms the story. Right now you're a threat they can eliminate quietly. Once this hits newspapers, you become martyrs they can't afford to create." It was cold logic, but Elijah couldn't fault it. Their safety lay not in hiding the truth, but in exposing it so thoroughly that silencing them would only prove the conspiracy's existence. "We need the other crates," Elijah said. "What we have here is damning, but incomplete. The journal mentioned sealed orders, specific evidence that would... The other crates are gone." Graves interrupted. "Destroyed by now, I'd wager. Then we work with what we have." Maggie returned to sorting documents. "Marshall, you said you have newspaper contacts. How quickly can we move? 24 hours, maybe less." Graves checked his pocket watch. "But you'll need to lay low until then. Whoever burned your house, Carrigan, they'll be watching for you come daylight." "Where do we go?" Graves considered. "There's an old mining office outside town, abandoned for years. Nobody would think to look there. We can't hide forever. You won't have to. Once this story breaks, everything changes." Graves moved toward the door. "Pack up those documents. I'll get a wagon." After he left, Elijah and Maggie worked in tense silence, bundling papers and wrapping them in canvas for protection. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten. Soon, the town would wake fully and discover the night's destruction. "I'm sorry," Elijah said quietly. "You were right to be skeptical. I should have let this go." "Don't." Maggie's tone was sharp. "Don't you dare apologize for uncovering the truth. Samuel Garrett died protecting this evidence. We're not going to dishonor that sacrifice by wishing we'd stayed ignorant. Your life is in danger because of my curiosity. My life has purpose because of your curiosity." She tied off the last bundle. "I've spent years cataloging other people's histories. Now we're making history. That's worth the risk." Elijah wanted to argue, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. Maggie had always been stronger than she looked, sharper than she let on. He'd asked her to help research a curious artifact. She'd chosen to stay when it became dangerous. That was her decision, her bravery. He would honor it by seeing this through. Graves returned with a small covered wagon. They loaded the documents quickly, covering them with old blankets and tools to disguise their true cargo. "Stay out of sight," Graves instructed. "I'll come for you when the newspaper is ready to print." They drove into the gray dawn, leaving the library and the smoking ruins of Elijah's life behind. The abandoned mining office smelled of rust and old earth. Wooden beams sagged under a roof that leaked in 3 places, but it was isolated, hidden among scrub brush and rocky outcroppings, invisible from the main road. Elijah and Maggie spent the day reviewing documents, making notes, preparing a narrative that would make sense to newspaper readers unfamiliar with 40-year-old territorial politics. It was delicate work. The evidence was damning, but required context. Cornelius Thatch had been a respected figure, Accusing him posthumously of funding militias and crushing labor movements would seem like sensationalism without proper documentation. "We need to establish the timeline," Maggie said, arranging papers in chronological order. "Show how the violence against workers coincided with these payments, and connect it to specific incidents." Elijah pulled out a letter referencing the Coulter's Ridge matter. "I remember reading about a strike that turned violent in Coulter's Ridge. Spring of 1885. 3 workers were killed. If we can prove Thatch funded the men who killed them, we prove murder." They worked through the afternoon building their case document by document. The story that emerged was uglier than Elijah had imagined. Thatch hadn't just opposed organized labor. He'd waged systematic war against it, using money and violence to maintain control over his workers. As evening shadows lengthened, Maggie stood and stretched. "How long until Graves returns?" he said tonight. Once the newspaper. The sound of hoofbeats cut him off. Multiple riders approaching fast. Elijah moved to the window. 5 men on horseback, circling the building, and leading them, unmistakable even at a distance, was Silas Boone. "How did they find us?" Maggie's voice was barely a whisper. "Doesn't matter." Elijah grabbed the nearest bundle of documents. "We have to run." But before they could move, the door burst open. Silas Boone stood silhouetted against the dying light, a pistol in his hand. "Going somewhere, Mr. Carrigan?" Behind him, his men spread out, blocking any escape route. "How did you find us?" Elijah kept himself between Boone and Maggie. "I followed Graves. Old fool thought he was being careful, but I've been tracking him since he visited your workshop yesterday." Boone stepped inside, his men forming a semicircle. "I knew he'd lead me to whatever you'd salvaged. This doesn't belong to you, doesn't it?" Boone's pleasant demeanor had vanished, replaced by something desperate and dangerous. "My grandfather died in disgrace because of what's in those papers." The Boone name became synonymous with cowardice. "Do you know what that's like? Growing up as the grandson of an outlaw who ran from treasure. There's no treasure here, just evidence of crimes. Evidence is treasure." Boone gestured with his pistol. "Evidence can restore my family's reputation. Prove we weren't cowards, we were smart. Smart enough not to cross Cornelius Thatch. So you'll what? Destroy it? Keep Thatch's secrets buried? I'll use it." Boone's eyes glittered. "Thatch is dead, but his empire survives. His son, his business partners, they'd pay handsomely to keep this evidence suppressed. And if they won't pay, I'll sell it to their competitors. Either way, the Boone name gets restored. Through blackmail." Maggie's voice was cold. "You're no better than Thatch. I'm practical, Miss Rowe, something you 2 idealists never learned to be." Boone motioned to his men. "Search the building. Take everything." His men moved to obey, rifling through the bundles of documents. Elijah watched helplessly as 40 years of hidden truth was once again stolen by men who valued profit over justice. Then a voice called from outside. "That's far enough, Boone." Marshal Graves stepped into the doorway, rifle leveled. Behind him stood Jonas Pike and 3 other townsmen, all armed. "You're outnumbered," Graves said quietly. "Tell your men to drop their weapons." Boone's jaw tightened. "You'd shoot me? A lawman shooting an unarmed citizen. You're holding a pistol on 2 people and ransacking private property. I'd call that armed and dangerous." Graves cocked the rifle. "Last chance." For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Then Boone laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think you've won? You think exposing this changes anything?" He lowered his pistol, but didn't drop it. "Thatcher's people already know. They've known since the house fire. Right now, they're preparing their own story. By the time your newspaper prints anything, they'll have buried it under lies and legal threats. Maybe." Graves didn't lower the rifle. "But we're going to try anyway. Fools." Boone backed toward the door. "All of you. This evidence has been buried for 40 years. It'll stay buried another 40. He turned to leave, then stopped. In one fluid motion, he raised his pistol toward Elijah. "If I can't have it, neither can you." Graves fired. The rifle shot echoed like thunder in the small space. Boone stumbled backward, his pistol clattering to the floor. He clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "You shot me." He sounded more surprised than angry. "I warned you." Graves kept the rifle trained on him. "Jonas, get him on a horse and take him to the doctor. The rest of you, secure those documents." Boone was hauled away, still muttering about family legacy and wasted chances. His men fled without their leader, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Elijah realized he was shaking. Maggie gripped his arm, her face pale. "That could have been you," she whispered. "But it wasn't." Eliza squeezed her hand. "Thanks to Graves." The marshal was checking the documents, making sure nothing had been damaged. "We need to move faster than I thought. If Boone knew about Thatcher's people preparing a counter-narrative, we're running out of time. How long do we have? Hours? Maybe less." Graves began bundling papers. "We take this straight to the newspaper. Print everything tonight. Damn the consequences. What about Boone? He'll survive, and he'll face charges for attempted murder." Graves looked at Elijah. But he was right about one thing. Thatcher's successors won't go quietly. Once this prints, expect lawsuits, threats, maybe worse. We've come too far to stop now. I hoped you'd say that. Graves smiled grimly. "Let's finish what Samuel Garrett started." They worked through the night at the newspaper office, the printing press clattering in the background as editors set type and arranged layout. Elijah and Maggie provided context for each document, explaining dates and connections, building the narrative that would appear in tomorrow's edition. But something nagged at Elijah, a piece that didn't fit. "The journal mentioned 3 crates," he said for the 10th time. "We only opened one. Boone stole the other 2, which probably contained more of the same." Maggie was exhausted, her eyes red from reading by lamplight. More correspondence, more evidence. Maybe. Elijah pulled out Samuel Garrett's journal, flipping through pages they'd already read dozens of times. But Garrett wrote about the crates differently. The first held supporting documentation, but the second and third, he called them the sealed orders. What's the difference? The supporting documentation proved crimes were committed. But the sealed orders? Elijah found the passage he was looking for. "Listen to this. The sealed orders contain truth, so terrible that even showing them to my guards would endanger us all. Thatch himself handled them. I saw fear in his eyes when he placed them in my care." Fear, Maggie straightened. What could frighten a man like Thatch? Evidence of something worse than labor suppression. Elijah stood, pacing, something that would destroy not just his reputation, but his entire empire. "But those crates are gone. Boone's men took them from your workshop." "Did they?" Elijah grabbed his coat. "Or did they take what they found in my workshop? What if Garrett hid the most damaging evidence somewhere else?" "Where?" Elijah thought back to the symbols carved throughout the coach. The careful maps in the journal. Garrett had created a puzzle, leading to the first crate. But what if that was just the beginning? "The coach," he said suddenly. "We need what's left of the coach." They returned to Elijah's destroyed workshop as dawn broke. The fire had burned itself out, leaving only charred timber and ash. But the workshop itself had survived, and inside the smashed remains of the stagecoach lay scattered across the floor. "What are we looking for?" Maggie picked through splintered wood carefully. The symbols, Garrett carved them in sequence. First symbol led to the journal. Second symbol led to the first crate. There must be a third symbol we missed. They searched methodically, checking every piece of wreckage. Most of the carvings had been destroyed when Boone's men axed the coach apart. But finally, beneath a section of the floor that had been protected by falling debris, Elijah found it. A fourth symbol, different from the others. A star within a circle within a square. And beneath the symbol, Carved so faintly it was almost invisible, were 3 words. Under the foundation, Elijah read aloud. The coach's foundation. No. Elijah stood, his heart racing. The building's foundation. Garrett didn't hide the most damaging evidence in the coach. He hid it here, under the workshop floor. They moved debris aside, exposing the wooden floorboards. Elijah had never paid much attention to the workshop floor. It was old, uneven, covered with decades of oil stains and sawdust. But now, searching carefully, he found a section that sounded hollow when tapped. Jonas arrived with his tools, summoned by a breathless message from Graves. Together, the 3 of them pried up the boards, revealing a crawl space beneath, and there, wrapped in the same oiled canvas as the first crate, sat 2 smaller boxes, the sealed orders. They brought them into the light carefully. These boxes were metal, not wood, sealed with locks that had survived the decades intact. "We don't have keys," Jonas said. "Then we break them." Elijah grabbed a chisel. The locks resisted, then snapped. Elijah opened the first box with hands that shook so badly he could barely lift the lid. Inside lay a single leather-bound book, not a journal this time, but a ledger, page after page of financial records, detailing every payment Thatch had made. Not just to militias, to judges, to territorial officials, to senators and governors. He bought them all, Maggie breathed. The entire territorial government. "Look at the dates," Elijah pointed. "These payments continued right up until Thatch's death. This isn't historical evidence. This is current corruption." The second box contained photographs, dozens of them, images of men in expensive suits shaking hands with known criminals, documents being exchanged, meetings that were never supposed to be recorded, and in every photograph, visible in the background or tucked into coat pockets, was Thatch's distinctive insignia. "This is why Garrett died," Elijah said quietly. "This proves Thatch didn't just commit crimes in the past. He built a system of corruption that outlived him. His son, his business partners, they're all still using his methods. And they'll kill to protect this." Maggie looked at the photographs. These people are still in power, still influential, which is exactly why we have to expose them. Elijah gathered the ledger and photographs. Graves said Thatch's people were preparing their own story. "Let them, we have proof they can't explain away." They returned to the newspaper office as the sun climbed above the horizon. The editors were preparing to print the first edition, but when Graves saw what they'd found, he ordered everything stopped. "We need to revise," he said. "Include this new evidence. That'll take hours. Then we take hours." Graves spread the photographs across a desk. "This is bigger than historical justice now. This is exposing a conspiracy that's still active." They worked frantically, updating the story, adding the new evidence. The newspaper's editor, a grizzled man named Patterson, read through everything with growing disbelief. "You understand what you're doing?" Patterson asked. "These people will come after us. After the newspaper. After everyone involved." "We understand," Elijah said. "Good." Patterson grinned. "Because I've been waiting my whole career for a story like this. Let's burn their house down." The printing press roared to life. Page after page rolled off, ink still wet, carrying 40 years of buried truth into the light. By noon, the first edition hit the streets. By evening, the story had spread throughout the territory. By the next morning, federal marshals were riding toward town, carrying warrants for arrests that would shake the territorial power structure to its foundations. And in a hospital bed, recovering from his shoulder wound, Silas Boone read the newspaper and understood that his family's legacy would now be forever tied, not to cowardice, but to the exposure of the greatest corruption scandal in territorial history. The Boone name would be remembered after all, just not the way Silas had planned. 3 months after the story broke, Elijah stood in the Territorial Museum, watching workers position the restored Stagecoach in its place of honor. It had taken weeks to rebuild what Boone's men had destroyed. Jonas had done most of the work, carefully piecing together splintered wood and bent iron, restoring the Midland Express to something close to its former appearance. The bullet holes remained. The scars stayed visible. Some wounds, Jonas had said, deserved to be remembered. "It looks good." Maggie appeared beside him, carrying a leather-bound folder. The placard just came back from the printer. She showed him the text that would accompany the display. The Midland Express. Last run, April 1885. This stagecoach carried not passengers, but evidence of territorial corruption that reached the highest levels of government. Its driver, Samuel Garrett, gave his hiss to protect the truth. 40 years later, that truth finally came to light. "Simple," Elijah said. "Garrett deserves more. Garrett deserves to be remembered truthfully, not as a hero in some romanticized version of history." Maggie set the folder down. "He was a man who made difficult choices, who tried to serve two masters and paid the price. That's more honest than any monument we could build." She was right, as usual. The trials were still ongoing. 6 territorial officials had been arrested. 2 railroad executives faced federal charges. The Thatch Empire had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. Assets seized, companies dissolved, but it had come at a cost. The newspaper had faced 3 lawsuits. Patterson's printing press had been vandalized twice. Elijah and Maggie received threats weekly, anonymous letters promising violence if they continued speaking publicly about what they'd found. Marshal Graves had resigned his position, unable to continue serving in a system he'd helped corrupt. He'd testified at every trial, his confession lending weight to the documentary evidence. The haunted look had left his eyes, replaced by something like peace. "Atonement," he called it. "Do you regret it?" Maggie asked quietly. "Your house, your safety, everything you lost." Elijah thought about that. His home was gone. His quiet life, teaching and collecting relics, had vanished. The moment he'd bid 25 cents on a broken stagecoach. He'd received job offers from universities wanting him to lecture on frontier history, but he'd turned them all down. This town was his home. This story was his responsibility. No regrets. He watched the workers secure the stagecoach's wheels. Samuel Garrett spent 40 years waiting for someone to finish what he started. "I'm glad it was us. We're not finished yet." Maggie pulled out a telegram from her folder. "The federal prosecutor wants us to testify next month, and there's talk of a congressional investigation into territorial land grants. More trials, more truth." Maggie smiled. "Isn't that what we wanted?" It was, but Elijah was beginning to understand that truth wasn't a destination. It was a process. Each revelation led to more questions. Each answer uncovered deeper corruption. The work of correcting history never truly ended. Jonas climbed down from the stagecoach, wiping his hands on a rag. "That's the last of it. She's ready for display." "Thank you, Jonas." Elijah shook his friend's scarred hand. "For everything. Just doing what's right." Jonas looked at the coach with something like affection. Strange to think, all that history, all those secrets hidden in something folks dismissed as worthless junk. "Nothing's worthless," Maggie said. "Everything has a story. We just have to be willing to listen." The museum would open to the public tomorrow. People would come to see the famous stagecoach, to read about the scandal that had reshaped territorial politics. Some would understand the significance, others would see only a relic, a curiosity from a bygone era. But the truth would be there, preserved and protected. Not buried, not forgotten. As they left the museum, walking into the late afternoon sunlight, Elijah felt the weight of the past 3 months settling into something manageable. Not light exactly, but bearable. "What now?" Maggie asked. Elijah thought about the other artifacts in his collection, the forgotten objects, gathering dust, each one potentially hiding its own secrets. History wasn't just written in books and official records. It lived in the objects people left behind, in the stories they tried to bury, in the truth that refused to stay silent. Now, he smiled at Maggie. We keep digging. Behind them, the restored stagecoach gleamed in the museum's display lights. Its doors stood open, inviting visitors to peer inside, to imagine the desperate flight of Samuel Garrett, to understand the price of truth. The cargo no outlaw dared to steal had finally reached its destination, not New Haven, not some tycoon's office, but here, in the light, where everyone could see it, where it belonged. The